If it was all lies, then why would the Bible use the very same kinds of? Why would God keep coming down to us on mountains? Why would the angels be on the? Why? Why? It doesn't make any sense unless it's actually true.
Welcome to Kingdoms Unveiled. Doug and I want to answer this question. What does it mean to seek first the kingdom of God? In order to seek it, you have to first understand it and the foundation of it. And that's what this podcast is about, pulling back the clutter on God's kingdom and the war that we find ourselves in. Today, your hosts are Doug Van Dorn, who is pastor of The U. If you don't know what that is, go back to the last episode and you can learn what that is. But he's been pastoring for 20 years at Reformed Baptist Church, the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado, a confessional, covenantal, Calvinistic, believing in the sovereignty of God and all things strange in his Bible. And I'm Jon Moffitt, the pastor of Grace Reformed Church in Spring Hill, Tennessee. And I guess I could claim all those titles as well, but it is true. We are two Reformed Baptists who love the gospel, love Jesus, and want you to see the glory of Christ in all of Scripture. That includes ziggurats and cosmic mountains and serpents and snakes and divine councils. So, Doug, we had a fun one last week. We left people on a cliffhanger. We set the foundation of the Tower of Babel and introduced even the concept of a cosmic mountain. So now that we kind of introduced you to the language and what it is, if this is your first episode, I will say we're building on it. It's like a story. You need to go back. You have to learn about who the divine council is, who the sons of God are, and then that'll make a little bit more sense about this episode today. So let's go back to the Tower of Babel and the ziggurat, because there's a little bit more we need to learn there and how there's more than one ziggurat in the Bible. So let's go.
All right. So, boy, there's lots of things we could talk about here.
Let's just figure out where we go.
First one that comes to my mind is that we had talked about Eden last time as a cosmic mountain, and I wanted to share some traditions that I think they're confused traditions in many ways. They come in the early church in the 4th century in the Syriac church fathers, especially Ephraim the Syrian, and he has a whole bunch of writings on the kind of life of Adam and Eve, and they have a really crazy book called The Cave of Treasures, and fun reading and stuff. And essentially what happened is that they kind of, I don't know if they mixed together traditions of the Garden of Eden and the Genesis 6 story, but Ephraim talks about how the Garden of Eden was actually Mount Hermon, the tallest mountain in Israel.
Really?
And yeah, he does. And it's just pretty wild, because this is, of course, the mountain that the gods come down, Shemiyaza and Azazel in the book of Enoch at Genesis 6 event. Now, we don't know why he said that Eden was Mount Hermon. I don't believe that it was, but I'm just telling you the tradition.
Right.
And so he's actually one of the first people that perpetrates the Sethite view in the church of Genesis 6. And the way that he kind of gets there is he says that, look, the mountain, Eden was Mount Hermon. And when they fell, everybody was kind of kicked off the top of the mountain, but the Sethites stayed kind of right at the door of the mountain, kind of mid-mountain or whatever. And all the Canaanites went down into the valley and the lowlands below, where they started building cities, and they became evil. And the Sethites were so good, and they're hanging out close to Eden and all this kind of stuff, still able to be near sort of the proximity of God. And I thought, well, that's just a really interesting picture of a cosmic mountain in a lot of ways. It's an interesting picture of the dispersion of evil. Farther away you get, the more evil things get to the cosmic mountain. The fact that it ties into the flood story with Enoch is pretty wild. I mean, there's just so many crazy things about it that I thought it was worth mentioning.
Yeah.
That
just sounds like, though, I mean, this happens a lot in our theology where we argue backwards. We have the concept and we want to find it in the text. Kind of feels like that's what's happening here.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I believe pretty strongly that Ephraim is living in Syria, which is the epicenter of where the Sethite view seems to have originated. And it came out of the rabbinical teaching where they desupernaturalize the text. That's where he's getting that from. And then kind of making the story probably some of it making up of himself and hearing other traditions or whatever the case may be. But I wanted to bring that up because there's something else in the Tower of Babel story that's pretty interesting that's related to all things weird Mount Hermon and the pre-flood. So they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Now, why is that significant? Well, I think it's significant because when you look at what, in my opinion, would be antediluvian, pre-flood architecture, megalithic architecture around the world, you go to, like, for example, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and you see these megalithic walls that are made of rocks that are bigger than anything that we can move on any kind of an ordinary scale today. And they're at elevations that are mind boggling. And they take these rocks from quarries that are miles and miles and miles away, and they fit them together with these polyagonal, corners and stuff like that. And you cannot fit a human hair in between these rocks and the way that they built these things. These things have lasted through earthquakes that are 8.0 on the Richter scale, and they're pre-diluvian. And it's like, what in the world? So I think that that's a tip of the hat to the megalithic architecture that we see, the great stone builders of antiquity, that by the time the Tower of Babel comes along, they're not able to duplicate that technology. And so they're building their ziggurat with brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. In other words, it's kind of a piece of junk.
It's a junkyard car.
It's a junkyard car. So I think that's kind of interesting because that I think it actually adds a little bit of humor to the fact that the Tower of Babel is man's attempt to make a cosmic mountain on his terms, and then to go up to the top of that mountain and then meet with drum roll. And that was kind of where we left it off last time, right? Like, who was it that they were wanting to meet with, right? So there's this interesting language that says, let us make a name for ourselves. And then God, the Lord comes down, and it talks about it in the plural, where let us go down and confuse their language. So it's like, well, what's the us there?
Exactly.
So this is the same problem that you see in Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image. I don't remember if we've talked about this or not, but in my opinion, you can look at Meredith Kline as a good Reformed scholar who takes this view. The us in Genesis 1:26 is not the plural of majesty, so it's not God talking to himself.
Right.
It's not the Trinity, but it's the divine council. And this will become significant when we finally do get to that episode on the sons of God. We're really laying the foundation for that, because we want to tell a biblical theological story of why it is that Israel and Christians are called sons of God. But in order to do that, we need to lay this foundation of divine counsel, of who the sons of God are in Genesis 6, and now of the cosmic mountain in the stuff that we're talking about here.
So let me get this straight, because this is something I did not know. I've learned many things today, Doug. So we'll just add this to it. I did not know that Kline took that view.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what book
takes
that's
it as a
in?
divine counsel.
Do you remember what book that's in?
Probably in his Genesis prologue.
The prologue. Okay.
And it might also be in his Harmageddon book, but I don't remember.
I'm going to go find that quote, because that is super fascinating that he would define
he's an Old Testament scholar. And,
yeah.
And he's the one where I actually learned about the divine counsel from without ever knowing I was learning it, because he never would talk about what it was. He would just mention it, but he would never tell you what it was. And I've always thought, well, maybe the reason why that is because he didn't want to get into trouble with people. Yeah,
it's kind of like you drop Calvinistic terms without, ever talking about them.
Exactly. So if the us in Genesis 1:26 is the divine counsel, and it's God speaking to a plurality of heavenly beings, very important to know that it's not the heavenly beings who are creating, because just right after that, God says, and God made man in his image.
He creates clarity.
Right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And that's the same thing that I think is going on here, that let us go down. And then what happens is that the Lord is the one who disperses them and gives them many tongues and all that kind of stuff. So the council is present. They're watching what's happening. They're participating on a spectator level, I guess, as God is speaking to them. But the question becomes, well, why would they be there? Why would they be in either place?
Yeah.
And
I
think
just
the
interact there.
answer is,
This is going back to that episode, which will, I know, tie to it later, but Job 38, where, because
yeah,
some people say, why, when were they created? Well, we don't know when they were created, but we know they were created before men because they watched it happen. That's why it
and
says to
they're
let us.
at the foundations of the earth.
That's right.
Watching it happen.
That's right. Sorry, I just want to interject that we have a passage that would tie the divine counsel from Genesis 1 to Job 38. That's probably where Klein makes his argument as well.
So why would they be here? And this gets back to the idea of the cosmic mountain.
Mm-hmm.
The cosmic mountain is the divine meeting place between heaven and earth. And this is where we can get kind of geeky and nerdy. And what we tried to do last week was set up the whole idea of a cosmic mountain from a biblical perspective, because we want people to know that this is not something that you have to go to other places to make an argument for.
That's right.
All that does is support and show that the Bible's just telling you what it's telling you from an orthodox, biblical, God-centered point of view. But the pagans are telling the same story, but they're just doing it in a perverted way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Which is kind of what you would expect. If that's actually the truth, as C.S. Lewis said, you would expect that the pagans would be talking about it, but they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get the story right.
That's right.
If it was all lies, then why would the Bible use the very same kinds of, why would God keep coming down to us on mountains? Why would the angels be on the, why? It doesn't make any sense unless it's actually true.
Right.
So as a cosmic mountain, at Eden, the heavenly beings are present. And we know this because Satan is there with them. And if we can take Isaiah 28 seriously, and I think it's Isaiah 31, the trees of Eden being personified and the stones of fire being personified as heavenly beings, they're there because it's a cosmic mountain. And Adam's been given a seat at the table. So what is Babel? Babel is the cosmic mountain being done man's way, where we build up to heaven in an attempt to, in my opinion, not reach God. They're not trying to honor Yahweh. They're not trying to worship the biblical creator. They are trying to get back to essentially the same stuff that was going on before the flood when the sons of God came down here, and they're trying to reconnect or re-interface with them, maybe get the knowledge that they had before, or re-implement the worship of the gods, or whatever the case might be. The whole point of this story is that what they're doing is evil, not good.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. No, and that's kind of why I tipped the hat to that, is that they're trying to interact and basically tap back into the powerful realm, the realm of the spirits, the realm of the Elohim, to gain back what they had lost. And it's interesting to think about how that came to be. You know, did the knowledge carry off of the ark? Was there leftover? I mean, I don't know.
There's all kinds of stories about that out there. I'll tell you,
I know.
Ancient stories.
But somehow, some way, the stories came about, and there was or maybe, I know there's like a lot of theories on this, but maybe there was another Elohim that fell and kind of aroused them to do this. Like, you should reconnect us back with humanity. I mean, doesn't really matter, but the point of it is that they're not trying to connect to Yahweh.
They're not trying to connect to him. Yeah, exactly.
Because then it would be, because the punishment then makes sense. Because in many ways too, what was the original command after Noah, right? They were to disperse, and they were to basically divide and conquer. And what did they do? In our own wisdom, no, we're better together. If we stay together, then we'll be more powerful. We'll make a name for ourselves. We'll be well known. And so God's curse upon them really is him fulfilling, like, no, this is what I wanted you to do, so we're going to go ahead and divide up the languages, which is a whole bunch of theories on that one. That one gets a little wild too. I've heard some strange stuff come out of that passage. I'm like, I don't know if I think it means what it is, but maybe it doesn't. It seems like it means what it says. So.
The one thing that you don't get from the Genesis 11 thing that you get from Deuteronomy 32 verses 7 and 8 is that the punishment was not just dispersion, but that the humans would have the sons of God allotted to them and put over them and put in charge of them. Why? Well, it's as punishment for what they did. If you're going to try and reach up to these heavenly beings, and you're going to try and worship them, and you're going to try and get information from them, and you're going to try and use them, fine, more power to you. I'll let you have them. And not only that, but it's kind of the reverse. If you look at Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20, and Deuteronomy 17:3, and I think Deuteronomy 29, I forget what the verse is, but there's 3 or 4 other passages in Deuteronomy that all basically say, look, it's a double curse, because they get us too. And it's not a good thing for them.
No, because they end up getting cursed for it.
In the words of Heiser, you're made for each other.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's fascinating. So do we want to read Deuteronomy 32 so people understand the connection between that and Tower of Babel?
Yeah, and absolutely. And, we actually kind of started our whole show here several weeks ago on this verse.
That's right.
And this is what it says. Deuteronomy 32, 7 and 8. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, and your elders, and they will tell you. So the question becomes, when is that? When are these days of old? Now, this is Moses saying this, right?
Right.
So it had to have been a long time ago for Moses. Well, we don't have a whole lot of information about what that would be, and there's only one thing that fits the bill. And guess what? It fits the bill perfectly. And that is the Tower of Babel story. So listen to the next language. When the Most High, interestingly, just a sidelight, Most High, El Elyon, and this is a term for God that's used almost exclusively in the context of Gentiles.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Yeah. So when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, that's where it's talking about Babel.
Yeah, because it only happened once.
Because it only happened once. And then it says he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. And that number in tradition is 70, because there's 70 nations at the Tower of Babel.
Interesting. There you go. So I wonder how many people are listening to this, and this is the first time they've ever had Deuteronomy 32 and Genesis 11 connected.
It's quite possible that it's the first time. And when I first ran across it, it was the first time for me. I didn't even know that Deuteronomy 32. I was fascinated with the next couple verses for years and years.
So we haven't even got there yet.
On this.
That's right.
With the desert land and the howling waste and the wilderness and the eagle stirring up its young. Those are the verses that captivated me. And then all of a sudden I come across this whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And I'm like, whoa, these 3 verses before it are like, wild. And then you start learning that, well, really the entire Song of Moses is just completely supernaturally supercharged.
So just to walk through the story then, so you have these people, they disobey God outside. I mean, what's shocker? They disobeyed God before the flood. They disobeyed God after the flood. And there's definitely some influence going on by fallen entities, fallen spirits that we can already see. And we get to the point where they are going to reverse it. God removed us from the mountain, then we're going to tie ourselves back in, and we're going to reintroduce this interaction that we had of old. How they got there, we don't know. And that's the thing that's interesting. I want to go back, Doug, to an episode we did a long time ago about Sola Scriptura. Is the Bible gives us enough information to keep the story rolling. It doesn't give us everything we'd like to know. It just gives us everything we need to know. So how they got to that point, why they got to that point, I don't know. We don't know.
Maybe God doesn't want us to know because we'd be too interested in trying to do it ourselves because we're able to.
That is absolutely true. Like it tells us not to practice necromancy, but not how it works.
Right, right.
We just know that it does. And I think there's a lot of theories on that. But anyway, so they create this mountain and God knows their heart. He knows their intentions. And so he divides them. And then later on, Moses comes back and this is how the Bible works. It works in these flashbacks. And I've always, I like a good TV show that does this as you're kind of going along. You're just getting like the first recipe in the cake, man. You're not, and then there's like you come back and you fold something in, then you fold something in, then you're starting to see it take shape. And this is exactly how the Bible unfolds, where the whole seed war in Genesis 6 or in Genesis 3, I mean, you're just getting underway in Genesis 6. And then 11 introduces a whole nother concept where there's a dividing. And then you get to Deuteronomy 32. And now this is, in my opinion, this is where you've got fourth dimension and third dimension collapsing on each other. So he's like, this is what happened on the earth. I divided them and separated them into different languages. And this at the same time, what was happening up in the spiritual realm. It's like he's peeling back. And the entire Bible is designed this way. Paul does it all the time in the New Testament. Here's what's going on in the church. Here's what's going on in the spiritual realm. Here's what's going on with us, but this is how the influence is happening up here. So it's early on, very early in the story. So what ends up, I mean, I don't know if we want to get into this now or if you want to keep going here, but it's kind of like there's something that ends up happening that goes way wrong with these 70 nations and the 70 gods or the 70 sons of God.
Yeah, the whole world is thrown into utter darkness. And we don't appreciate this darkness, and you get these questions all the time about the people who've never heard about God and all this kind of stuff. And that's probably a whole episode that we could do with Paul's answer to that. But I'll take you to Acts 17, because this is Paul talking to the Athenians, which is interesting because these are the high men of Greek philosophy, and they would have known all these stories and everything. In fact, Paul even quotes one of their poets in this section. But I'll just start in verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth. So he's distinguishing God from everyone else, all the gods. He does not live in temples made by man. Oh, what could that refer to? Well, we just talked about one of them, Tower of Babel. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth. And here's the key: having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Where does he get that from? Well, that comes straight up out of Deuteronomy 32, 7 and 8. In other words, Paul's thinking about this very text as he's giving the gospel to the Athenians. And then he says that they should seek for God and perhaps feel their way to find him. Yet he's not actually far from each one of us. And then he quotes the poet, for in him we live and move and have our being. And some of your own poets have said we are indeed his offspring. So the darkness is there. He's given them over to the gods, but he's still the creator. He's still near. And maybe you guys could reach out and grope out in darkness and find him. But of course, Paul knows that none of them are doing that. No one of them will do that. And so that's why he uses this whole thing as then his explanation and his background to then give them the gospel of Jesus. So he goes, then being God's offspring, sons of God, you mean? Sons of God? So, I think we would need to get into this next time, John. I think we're ready to give people the sons of God thing.
Yep.
We ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone or an image formed by an art of an imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked. But now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead.
So he affirms Deuteronomy 32 and the Tower of Babel in his sermon.
In the sermon to the Athenians. Yep. And it's only after that then he gives them the gospel. He needs them to remember these stories, where they come from. And they all had the stories. They knew what he was talking about.
Absolutely.
Like quotes of poets, for crying out loud.
And it's amazing. Like, and here's the thing: what I love about what we're doing, I don't feel like we have to change what words mean, change the text, try and force things in there. We're just laying it all out and making the connection and saying, hey, just take it at face value for what it's saying. I mean, this is the outflow of the text, right? This is the outflow of what's happening. And so if we're going to make the connection, you have the sons, you have the nations, or the one nation, the one people of God who are building this ziggurat. They want to go up and re-tap into the gods. They want to re-tap into the days of old, the days of Genesis 6.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And so God says, fine, if that's what you want, I'm going to disperse you into 70 different nations, and I'm going to give you these gods. And so he puts them over, puts the sons of God, or you could say the Elohim, if you feel more comfortable saying angels, he puts them over the nations. And this is what leads us to Psalm 82, where he rebukes them because they have fallen from their responsibility as well. We're not going to get into this week, but we will soon. And so this is where Paul eventually refers back to in his sermon in Acts. And so if you don't have that foundation, you're not going to understand why Paul is saying that. And you're kind of just going to throw it off like, well, I'm not sure. That was just kind of weird. I'm not sure what that is for. But it is all connected, because throughout the rest of the story, I mean, we're just in Genesis 11. Throughout the rest of the story, these gods that are over the nations, they play a part in the rest of the story all the way into the New Testament.
All the time. Yeah. All the time. I mean, there are reasons why the first two commandments are what they are. And, Baal worship, Molech worship, Asherah worship, these things were the plague of Israel throughout the entire Old Testament. And it starts even in, the gods of Egypt, for crying out loud. And then all their temptations in the wilderness. There's a crazy verse. I'll bring this one up. I don't know if you've ever heard this one or not, but end of Exodus 15.
Okay.
This is wild, man. So first time I read this, I was like, you got to be kidding me. So it's just one verse. And it's right before the bread from heaven, the manna comes down. It says, they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. And you're like, well, who cares?
Right.
Well, guess what? First of all, you have the number 12. That's the number we recognize because of the tribes of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the number 70. And we haven't done any talking about this yet. Maybe if we talk about the world tree or something, we can get there. But trees are deeply associated with the sons of God, profoundly. Stone and tree, that's what they make their gods out of. Trees of Eden is what Ezekiel calls these entities. So you've got 70 of them. Guess what? That is a number of the sons of God. And they're at the place called Elim. And guess what that means? The place of the gods. That's what Elim is.
They came to the place of the gods.
And so then what happens immediately after that is that they are tested in the wilderness. They're tempted.
They set out from Elim, and all the congregations of the people came out to the wilderness of sin.
Sin is actually you should pronounce it seen.
Oh, seen.
Because this is actually the moon god.
Oh, well, that is.
So Sinai has the root of his name in it. It's the mountain of the moon god. Seen.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't see that it's capitalized there. Yeah, that's fascinating. No, I've never seen that. And this is where I think at times it can be complicated because we are dealing with ancient language and translation. And we did a whole episode on translation and how, and I say this, and I have to keep saying it so people understand. When you have someone who is going from the original text into English, they are having to make they have to translate it and then make interpretive decisions. And at times, Doug and I are arguing that the translators made interpretations based upon their theology that doesn't necessarily align with the text. It's based on their history or tradition that isn't necessarily true. And examples of this sometimes is when, like you say, when it says, that Noah was perfect in his generation versus it's plural, it's supposed to be generations, or using
blameless in his generation.
Yeah, blameless. Yeah.
Even more, because that one gives you the idea that he's morally pure when the idea is actually perfect.
That's right.
It's more like a spotless lamb that doesn't have any physical blemishes.
Right. And it would be twice that he says it because God's already acknowledged that the man is of faith. And so to say it twice doesn't make any sense, but to say that he's of faith and he's of a pure line, which means he doesn't have Nephilim blood in him, it's very different. Yeah. So there's a lot of translations that we deal with this, even when we're dealing, we're going to get into this in the coming weeks when we're talking about the sons of God, how people want to turn it into kings or turn it into men, and why when you start doing those types of interpretations, it really does mess with the rest of your understanding of the Bible. And to what I would say de-supernaturalize or to make the Bible comfortable. Because, Doug, I'm sure you'll admit, there are things that read in the Bible and they're like, that is just weird. And that is just strange. And I'm not quite sure how to interpret that.
I know, kind of like virgin births.
Right.
Kind of like, I don't know, guys rising from the dead.
Right.
I don't know, houses being filled with tongues of fire.
Yep. Chariots of
Nothing
fire.
weird about it.
Yeah, nothing
It's
wrong with
funny
that.
to me. Like, we believe so many weird things
I
already,
know.
but then we get hung up because these things are weird. Like, everything you believe is already weird. So why are you getting hung up on the fact that it's weird?
It's like there's the acceptable weird, and then there's the not acceptable weird. And
Right.
somehow the line was drawn by somebody somewhere down the road, And it is very strange. You're just kind of like, why are we okay with accepting that, but we're not okay accepting this?
You talk to Richard Dawkins and you say, I believe in the virgin birth. He's like, you're crazy. A virgin can't give birth? You're nuts.
I know, but every Christian's like, it's a part of the gospel. And we're like,
yeah, exactly.
Which most people don't know this. When it says that God's promise says that the Messiah is going to come from the seed of Eve, seeds don't come from women. It's the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the seed of the man.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
So virgin birth was announced in the garden, that it was of the seed of Eve. And I think that's fascinating that even throughout, like, you look at, and this is not a virgin birth, but you can look at Abraham and how Abraham's and Isaac was born.
Right, Isaac. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a miracle birth.
Miracle birth. Yeah. You see miracle births all throughout the John the Baptist, a miracle birth. So it's just interesting how you just kind of have this flow, and it's always kind of tipping the hat back to the seed. Like the Messiah didn't come from Adam, basically, is the point, because Adam is the one who brought sin into the world. So all this stuff is connected, and it's like, oh, it's nerdy, John, it's fine, but how does that help me in my work tomorrow? How does that help me with my child who has cancer? How does it help me with my son who's wandered? How does it help me from my husband who's abusing me? Well, what it does is it reminds you, in an absolute horrendous war that's happening right now between the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light, God has given us a foundation of saying, I am in control. See what I have done in the past. See how involved I am, not how I've evolved, but involved I am, and that all of this has a purpose. And so when Jesus, I think this is interesting, and we could kind of, we'll leave the sons of God on for our next episode, but I do introduce this here. Jesus dies, and in his ministry for 3 years, he kept saying, the kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like. And the disciples weren't getting it, because Peter's pulling out a sword. He comes in, palm branches everywhere. They're thinking physical reinstatement of David on the throne. And they're like, you're not getting this, man, guys. This is a spiritual kingdom. So he dies, raises from the grave. And it says in the book of Acts, he spent 40 days with the disciples before he left. And you know what he taught them? It says he taught them on the kingdom of God. It said, guys, recap of the last 3 years. And so what do the disciples then do when Jesus ascends? They are now the proclaimers of the good news of the king, of the kingdom, right? So Jesus says, look, I taught you how to seek first the kingdom of God. Now you are the ones who's going to take the king, me, to the nations, and you are going to be the temple. So this is all that Doug and I are trying to do, is help you understand that our king has called us to seek his kingdom, but we're confused on what it is. We've gotten wrapped up in the physical realm. We've gotten wrapped up in loving this world, which we're told not to. And so what we want to do is encourage all of us to be able to peel back all of the layers that have been put on here, allow the weirdness to be weird, because that's what God put in there, to strengthen our hearts and remind us that as we go to work, and as we vote at the booths coming up here very soon, and as we go and stand for life and push back against abortion, all of this is part of the kingdom and reflecting the salt and light of the king, as we're hoping, as Peter says, to give a hope of the answer that lies within it, to give an answer of the hope that lies within us. So this isn't, as we have said multiple times, this isn't just for fun. It's not for laughs. We think that all of this helps prepare our minds and our hearts to continue to do the work of the king. There's my sermon, Doug. I got out.
Yeah, if you understand what we're trying to do is help you understand the invisible realm, so that it will actually help you make sense of the visible physical realm.
That's right.
In ways that you couldn't possibly imagine.
Yeah. To think that the invisible realm wasn't involved in killing all of the children when Jesus shows up on the scene is insane. It is. They totally were, right? I mean, Judas was definitely manipulated by the invisible realm. And then you have Paul, who just flat out tells you, you're not fighting against people, guys.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And then what is that? Everything that he's naming, all these realms and powers and rulers, He's just ticking off the story of the Old Testament. That's the argument that Doug and I are making.
Yeah.
The councils and the fallen angels and all of this stuff that's happening in the demons and the realms, he's just giving bullet points summarizing the Old Testament. But if you don't understand the Old Testament, you hear Paul's warning and be like, yeah, that's kind of weird. I don't really know what that means. I'm not a big believer in ghosts, demons, angels, whatever. I guess I'll just read my Bible and, tithe, and I should be fine. And I think that's why a lot of Christians are ineffective. They're entangled in sin. There's a reason why Paul warns us, and he says, the church is designed to protect you from being tossed about by every wind of doctrine and cunningness of humanity. I take that to mean, Doug, we can be.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
People ask me all the time, do you think a Christian could do that? I was like,
why would you take that seriously?
Exactly. I know, right? I always ask people, how does God promise you won't be swayed by bad doctrine or bad teaching? People say, well, Bible reading, and I was like, that's not what he said. He said the church. He's designed the church to protect us, and we kind of don't believe there's a threat. This is why 1 John says, test the spirits. Why? Well, because there's false ones trying to teach you false truth, trying to teach you lies. Anyways, I'm just trying to connect this all every week for us, because there is a lot. I feel like there is a rise in the interest, which you and I are excited about, but there's also a rise in what I would say Paul is warning about, like genealogies and myths. He says, don't fall off into that. And that would be a good passage or to cover one day to explain what that means.
Oh yeah, we will. We could have fun with that one.
All right, so let's tell them a little about what we're going to talk about next week. So we've kind of introduced this all. What's the little cliffhanger? Where are we going next week?
I think what we should do is we've talked about the sons of God, but we haven't talked about it from the human earthly point of view.
That's right.
So Israel's called the son of God, and the Christians are called the sons of God. The question now becomes why? What does this mean? Where does this come from? Well, now we're ready to answer that question in a way that is completely mind-blowing to people.
It is fun, and it's going to take a couple episodes to explain. So tune back in to find out the significance of why we're called the sons of God and the divine council and the cosmic mountain. How is that all connected? So I hope you're encouraged. Love your pastor, listen to the gospel, receive the ordinary means of grace. And if you're not at a good church, 2 pastors would encourage you to do so. Go find a good church. We'll see you next week.